All right. Yeah, again, thank you guys for coming. We're going to talk about a trip that I experienced about 3 years ago. I'll give a little bit of background about myself and kind of what I do leading up to the trip and now. Now I am a freelance professional photographer. I shoot a lot of lifestyle editorial for magazine and some advertising work. I kind of came to do that through my family. My father was a photographer, pretty much working professionally in the 70s through the 90s. And I learned a lot of technique from his color slides and in the darkroom as a child. Kind of kept going with that. Well, I'll kind of go back to what this whole thing is about, is this trip. So essentially, it started as kind of a crazy idea of something that I wanted to do to kind of get out and see the world. But what kind of came out of that developed into something a little grander, a little bigger in scale. But essentially at the time I was just going to school part-time and working part-time as well, and just really didn't have much going on. And while that was happening, my mother got sick with breast cancer, and she essentially walked in kind of for like another checkup on some other ailment of hers, and they diagnosed her with stage 4 ductal carcinoma. And within about a month of her diagnosis, she passed away. I was 18, and then I started this trip a little bit after that, kind of in memory of her. My father had passed away when I was about 2 years old too, so it was kind of a release event. Like, I mean, I was trying to get away from that situation. I was feeling very depressed. And also I didn't, like I said, have much tying me there anymore, other than, you know, friends and kind of these commitments that we kind of get ourselves into, but I really felt the need to get away. So I spent months and months, I think about 5 months in total, planning. And by planning, I tried to make this trip as approachable as possible, because I would always, I don't know, throughout my growing up, I would read trips of like great adventures, and it always kind of went over my head. I'm like, well, how do you get like a sponsored, or how do you get an expedition team with like all these people? Like, it just seemed so wild to me, but I wanted to make it approachable. So by research, a lot of it was Google, a lot of it was hanging out with friends of mine and just kind of bouncing ideas off, and yeah, just kind of taking it step by step and making it so it was very approachable. So by doing that, we did use Google Maps to figure out walking directions. At the time, I didn't have an iPhone, so I could have kept that going and like taken an iPhone with me. That would have saved me a lot of time. I'll get into that when I get into my route, but that changed. I didn't have an iPhone. I kind of like threw caution to the wind and just went. But yeah, so essentially the trip was from Long Beach. So it essentially just goes through, I can go back to that once we have some time, but it'll go through the about 17 states that I walked through. And I didn't do this trip alone. I had kind of a support team, which consisted of my best friend in my Ranger, a Ford Ranger. It was very complicated, a lot of logistics went into it. Essentially, you had a cell phone, the truck, and then all my stuff in it, and we lived in that together. I would see him about once a week, but essentially shared a truck as far as like whatever home we had, that was about as close to it we had for the trip. His name is Anthony Felix, and I've known him for about since I was 9 or 10, so he was a great supporter. So I'll start kind of going into the details of the trip. Essentially, like I said, the first few months before even was spent planning. So the original route that I had planned was something like this. It was a little more ambitious than the final trip. Essentially, it was all of the United States, all four corners. I decided about like right here to not do that. It was a lot pretty arduous, and then also some other like events I wanted to meet up with somebody. It didn't line up, and that somebody is my wife. She was gonna be somewhere else, so it didn't work out. So I totally changed it all, but essentially that's how we did it. I would sit down with friends and be like, okay, how far is it from here to here to here? And we'd kind of plan out each day. And it helped me, get a scope of like what I was getting into, but also, like I said, I kind of threw it out because I didn't have a chance to have a computer with me every day or an iPhone, and I didn't want to have to rely on like finding a printer to like print these out. So it was kind of just like, how about I stick to what I actually did, and I stuck to major freeways and highways. In California, I walked on Highway 1, intermittently with 101, which is the freeway portion. And then from San Francisco on, while we're looking at a map, I went through northern Nevada. Essentially, I was on Interstate 80 all the way across. In Ogallala, Nebraska, I ended up getting a written warning for the first time to go around to New London. So I thought it was fair enough for me to take a ferry ride since it was longer to get to the ferry. So then from New London, I walked on 1 and 1A, which is the equivalent coastal highway, to Portland, Maine. And then I ran from Portland, Maine to Augusta. I ran the last 32 miles by accident and kind of a joke. I'll get into that like when I get more into these details. But essentially, somebody propositioned me that it would be funny if I ran a marathon at the last day. I was like, sure. Long story short, I messed up the calculation, and I had to do 32 miles. It was really bad. Did a lot of logistics as far as distance and things like that. This is Anthony here in winter on this side. And then that is our magical vehicle, a 2004 Ford Ranger. So in those planning months, I kind of started reaching out to the community around me electronically and just by talking. First thing I did, so weird generational thing, is make a Facebook event and just kind of started talking to people. And within about 3 days, it went through 53,000 people, and I started like kind of freaking out. Yeah, I like made it, and I came back to it, and there was like messages from Japan and like Uruguay, like all these places, and I got emails. And from then, I just like, I would ask people like, okay, what do you think I should do? How should I do this? Like, do you know where I can buy this? And it just turned into like this weird personal forum. Like, it really gave me a lot of feedback that I needed and support. And through that, I met kind of brand some stuff. We just gave these out at marketing material. At the time I was 18, I didn't really understand what like marketing and like ad campaigns and social media campaigns were, but it was like, no, I just need to do this. So it happened, and we produced a lot of cool stuff. And I started really writing to papers, just telling them what I was about to be, and it kind of got a good amount of press from it. So yeah, I'll kind of start at the beginning of my trip. This is my mother when I was younger. Her name was Janet Hitchcock. I'm originally from Iowa, same with my father. When he passed away when I was 2, I moved to Nebraska for a while. But I mostly grew up kind of where this information is, Long Beach, California. I moved out there to take care of my grandparents, and as things went on, that's just kind of where I grew up. And I started my trip from my house, my grandparents' house. That's the truck, like the day before. Thankfully, Google Maps came by. So the first day, in preparation for this, as far as like my body went, in high school, I ran cross country, did varsity cross country and track. And from that, I kind of learned how to like increase distance. I would just do it a little bit at a time. And in order to do this, I just took all my stuff and put it in a backpack and started doing all my errands. And at a certain point, I was just racking up. I think a lot of this trip for me was very serendipitous. All these seemingly meaningful things kind of lined up as I went along. And that was kind of the first thing of like, let's stick through this, let's try it out. And kind of kept going. I'll go a little quicker through some of this. So yeah, in California and along the way, I kind of would stay wherever I could. I would sleep in drainage ditches on the roofs of grocery stores. I had to be very resourceful. One of the evenings, if you can see right here, those very blurry on this screen anyways, is a stick hut. I found a stick hut on the side of the freeway. If you were to be anywhere near Santa Barbara, you would find it right here by the 101. Here is a video of it. Just a quick little recording. I'll show you guys and then I'll move on. But yeah, so if you're near Santa Barbara, just south of Isla Vista, where UCSB is, you'll find a great little home. We'll go slowly. We'll get there. That's what happens when you have embedded video. Well, for the sake of time, I'll move on. But it's a small rock hut. It's pretty excellent. So essentially, I just kept going. I had a friend that went to UC Santa Cruz. I went and visited him. This is when I started realizing how slow I was going. I was going 15, maybe 20 miles a day. I met a random person on the side of the freeway near Long Beach. He passed me like just south of Santa Cruz and stopped and found me and took my picture. It was like 20 days later, and he had like been home for multiple weeks, decided to take a vacation, and then had passed me like already, like came up. It's like, oh, hey, nice to see you. So I realized how different walking and driving was. That was a few hours from his home. That was 20 days for me. Like, I don't know if we'll be able to see it on this little screen. That little blob there, that's me. Google Maps found me right by UC. I remember seeing it and taking a mental note, like I need to find that. Yeah, that's on High Street, right by kind of the meadows at UC. LA to San Francisco, that's how long it took me to walk there. When I got to San Francisco, I did an interview and did some slam poetry at this thing called Pirate Cat Radio, which is run by a pretty well-known activist and poet there, Diamond Dave. He was a friend of Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Jack Kerouac. Just this is him here, just this awesome guy. This guy, great. Just old hippie, but runs the town. So essentially, yeah, I just kind of did something like this where I talked about my trip, and it's a Pirate Cat radio. So at the time, they had no licensing. They would just like blare it into the airwaves, which is very dangerous as far as fees go. And yeah, they would have like open mics over the airwaves. But yeah, San Francisco, like I said, I decided to change my route. That was about when. mixed emotions about this portion of the trip. I started going directly into the desert in June and July. Sparks, Bonneville Salt Flats. It was awful. But through that, it was a very, I learned a lot during that experience. It kind of put me in a very uncomfortable place as far as my work and how I felt just throughout the day. At this point in the trip and continued throughout, I maintained a pace of at least 30 miles a day. I kind of maxed out in Wyoming, which is a state after this. I did 62 miles in one day. I walked for about 25 hours straight, just to see if I could. And it was a very interesting experience. Some of these images, this is later on in the trip, but this one on the very right, you can see is a sunset on Interstate 80 near Winnemucca, Nevada. My lens for my camera broke midway through California. It's kind of filled with dust and was fixed in this one point, and I had to take these kind of surreal blurry landscapes or portraits or whatever I was doing. And I think now, my style has changed a lot from when I was like 19 working wise, but I think that's a pretty good summation of like a lot of that trip. It was kind of blurry. There's just the impressions of things. It was very stark and contrast. Like there's just not much but mountains and the road for me. So yeah, as I went through the desert, went through Reno. This section in this map, which again, I will make this map available to you too. It's online. You can play with it, and it's all vectored out. There's all sorts of little stuff to find in there. But this is that photo. That is Rye Patch Reservoir. I found it on Google Maps. It looks like this. Nothing, pretty much. There's just like a parking lot. And this trip was my first experience kind of as a working professional, like outside of, just my own circles of friends in Los Angeles. I essentially worked with a couple companies for trade and sponsorship for my trip. I had a goal to raise funds and talk to people about breast cancer and kind of my perspective of it, and that's what this whole trip was about. So doing that, I opened some dialogue with a few companies in order to help me, and one of them that I started kind of working for in trade was Osprey, and I will show you guys later. This is the backpack of my trip. They gave me a sponsorship. They $800 worth of gear that I still use to this day. And so I worked with Osprey and Brooks Running Company. That they make a lot of great trail shoes. And I just knew to think of them from my cross-country running. I just really respected what they made. So yeah, throughout the trip, I continued to work kind of on a professional level, like doing these campaigns and trying to raise money, and also providing images essentially for these companies as I was going along. Malibu in the bushes. Along the rest of the trip, I found about 4 iPods, one fully charged and filled with music. It was great, in a case. A 14-karat gold ring, probably about 4 pairs of shoes, a Patagonia rain jacket in my size, countless other things, just so many things on the ground. Some of which you don't want to pick up, but those were some helpful things. So I'll show you a clip in a second. Hopefully it'll load, unlike the other ones. But a lot of my trip was spent 8 to 12 inches, maybe more if I had the space, but just in areas such as this where I'm very close to traffic going 80 miles an hour all day. I got very used to it. It was just kind of white noise at a certain point, but pretty dangerous. Nowhere along the way was I really injured other than some pretty bad blistering or sunburn, or I guess I had kind of like heat exhaustion, but nothing that like took me out of walking for more than a day or a night or something. Pretty minor. So somehow on the freeways I was not pummeled quickly. So these are just kind of some more images to give you an idea of what I'm seeing. Here is that clip. We'll see how it does. So this will kind of give an audio and video like feel to 18 hours a day. This is kind of what I saw. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah. And that was a little more open, like gentle version of some of the sections. Near San Francisco, I literally had on my left 200-foot cliff into the ocean, kind of by Pacifica, and then to the right, solid rock or traffic. So there's all sorts of mixed areas. I went through California, northern Nevada. Here we're getting into Nebraska. So through Utah, all of these states, Utah, Wyoming, Nevada, California, I was purely staying with strangers, like either people I've met along the way, or I did couchsurfing.org. I signed up with them and we kind of made a profile and would just broadcast that my friend and I were looking for a place. Nowhere along the way either did we have any negative experiences with that. The worst one we had, somebody just said, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" And then like, "I'm going to bed." And that was it. And we like woke up in this like stranger's house. But that was, everybody was so supportive and helpful. And we really got into some pretty intense conversation, very intimate conversation about kind of some rough stuff, like, you know, whether they had experiences with cancer or some other thing. That was kind of my goal of this trip, was to just kind of flush that out, just talk to people about things, you know, things they've gone through. I don't know. It was just kind of hard for me. So I started going in Nebraska. In the middle of Nebraska, their wedding. That was pretty fun. They are from Winterset, Iowa, which is where John Wayne is born as well. If you ever go there, you will know it for sure. They will tell you. It's also the Bridges of Madison County. If you've ever seen that movie, that is Madison County. Here is some work of my father's. So he was kind of considered close to a master's, essentially, with like traditional black and white work. He did a lot of 35 millimeter and large format, which I try to do a lot to this day. He was a judge for the state fair and actually had a plaque after him for about 10 years after he passed. I was going to think of what I was going to say. Essentially, yeah, a lot of my technique, even as a professional, I learned from just looking at his slides and kind of like trying to replicate that. And this is kind of what I was left with. He was born with a congenital heart disease where he essentially had holes in the valves of his heart. So he passed away at 32, which is pretty young. And I don't know, it's just always great to see this work and then see where I am now. Like I like to really work towards that, as far as, especially with film work. I integrate a lot of analog and film-based processes in my work, mostly in my fine art stuff. On some commercial shoots, I will bring along, a film camera. Working now as a professional, digital kind of makes more sense. It's cheaper, it's faster, but I think some things are lost in that process. So I like to keep my roots, at least. I don't know if that applies to other people, but I feel very comfortable with it. So that's something I try to stick with. So after some time in Iowa, I moved on to Illinois, where I went to Chicago. You might have seen this airport before, Chicago O'Hare. There I spent a little over a week. I actually ended up staying with somebody that ran a nonprofit called Circus Team that essentially provided like a safe haven and after-school program that taught circus events and helped inner city kids do their homework. So this little girl was showing me how to juggle. They learned how to do circus rings, like these giant acrobatic rings. Some of them have went on to like get hired to Cirque du Soleil, essentially through that program. So that was pretty awesome to stay with them. Yeah, and as we keep going, I'll kind of zoom in a little bit. In Ohio, in Cleveland was actually where it started. I don't know why it's not in here. When I got to Cleveland, Ohio, that says Columbus, but Cleveland was the first time I went to something called Occupy. That was, during my trip, that was the height of the Occupy movement. And the first day it happened, I was in Cleveland, and they were like, yeah, it's happening everywhere. Like, here's this thing. And I thought, I'd already be camping. I might as well check these out. And I ended up going to about 13 of them. This middle image here is Occupy Wall Street. I camped there the day before the mayor kind of put the orders to have it like hose down and kick everyone out. So I avoided a probably pretty heavy ticket or jail time or something. But that's an Australian reporter talking to kind of one of some architectural work. But he met me. Thankfully, I had a photographer there. This is the moment I made it to the Atlantic Ocean. It was an awesome Jewish holiday. So the entire beach was filled with Hasidic families in full suits, just swimming in their suits and partying. It was great. Coney Island, if you haven't been, or if you've ever been to Venice Beach in California, very similar. Very strange place. Cool though, it was great. But it was kind of a strange experience to be. That's where I kind of was stopping. Is a big point. I rode the Cyclone. If you've ever ridden that, you always check for your wallet after because it kind of feels like you've been mugged. It's a very rough roller coaster. It's pretty bad. So then I start kind of getting out of the city. I spent maybe about a week there. At this point, it is just after October, so we're getting into colder months. So I had gone through pretty much the Midwest and the desert in the hottest points, and then I started getting into the East Coast at its coldest points. So that was great. Here is the ferry. Here's our truck on the ferry going from Orient, New York to New London. Essentially, when I got there, I got word from somebody that was working at a restaurant that we were talking to that I should check out, if I like architecture, I should check out this abandoned mental hospital in Preston, Connecticut. This is a Norwich State Hospital. It was built in 1809. It was closed for reasons of abuse in the staff. They were doing trepanation and all sorts of although at the time that was accepted, kind of went into some other pretty intense place. But that was something I got to explore along my trip. It's over 100 buildings, 13 acres. There was a bakery, a machine shop, a 300-seat theater. It's just expansive. It was self-sufficient at one point. Part of it was rebuilt in the 70s, as you can see, these kind of strange barrack-looking buildings. But there's a journal entry that goes with that. So yeah, I started going up the coast, Boston. Did some Occupy Boston there and Portland, Maine. And this is where, this links to my documentary as well, but essentially from Portland to Augusta, which was a little over 30 miles. Or actually, no, I probably started a little after Portland. I ran the last portion and kind of, if you ask what I did at the end of the trip, I kind of rockied the stairs at the state capitol building. I ran up the stairs, collapsed, and we left the next day. I was not in Maine long. At this point, I'd spent a little over 2 weeks in Maine, but we didn't stay in Augusta. I was in a pretty big hurry to get home. And the way that documentary came about is essentially, like I was saying, I was using this camera as just kind of like a third eye, just going, oh, this is awesome, this is awesome. And I do some video work now that's a lot more tight and strict as far as the way that it's created, but I met a friend of Ira in New York.
Various cultures throughout the United States of what the United States is,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess I'm wondering, what being a citizen in the United States really means, and I feel like, you have a unique perspective perspective, just being in so many different environments with
Mhm.
so many people. I mean, do you have any, I don't, or, it's not, I guess not a question, but do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, there are definite differences you can feel in each portion of the United States. But the more, I don't know, I kind of have, you're right, I guess I have a little bit of a unique perspective. To me, I feel like my mind was kind of like expanded in this really quick time where I was just like saw all of it super fast and I had to like kind of decode it. And I don't know, as I went, I met people that all wanted the same thing. They wanted to have friends, you know, they wanted to be paid a nice living wage. They had certain twinges on that in certain areas of the country, you know, as to whether, how that would manifest itself. But everywhere I went, this whole trip kind of restored my faith in humanity. Like everyone was so gracious, and I don't know if that was because of the position I was in or how I was introduced to them. But I think as far as like being a citizen of the U.S., or at least the people that I met, it was kind of homogenous, like in the fact that they were all just, you know, trying to get by and looking to do some sort of good. So I don't know, it was great. I kind of came at it, growing up in LA, I was a little more cynical when I left. I was kind of like, oh man, I would get all sorts of warnings from my friends, like, oh, look out, you know, like stuff is dangerous. And I only had one bad experience, and I can tell you about that. It was kind of, well, it was not my fault, but I was in the south side of Chicago. This gang member, which I know of by all of his tattoos on his neck, telling me every sector of the gang he was in, essentially. He was in MS-13, which is an El Salvadorian gang, and he essentially asked for my wallet. I told him no, and he tried to hit me, and there was like a bit of a physical altercation in which I succeeded and left promptly. And a bunch of his friends grabbed like duffel bags, which I'm pretty sure were filled with guns, like that were on the porch, and started kind of chasing after me on a place where I just was like 2 months ago. And it really messed with my head for a while. Like I got back home and I was just like, I think flying, I would have been angry. That would have been definitely.
You mentioned you
Yeah.
wrote or contacted newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And you said something about the media. Did you keep in touch with reporters all the way across?
There were a few that would kind of check back in with me, but and they once in a while I would get the newspaper articles. Some of these too happened before the walk. Some of these in LA. This is like a blog there. This was a pretty crazy one. Xavier and Weekly, it's a university in Nova Scotia. They found me somehow. But no, I think there was one that I kept in contact with, but the rest kind of just like did it, and that was about it. But I don't know. I do continue to maintain relationships with like Osprey and Brooks. Like they check in with me, and I tell them, you know, like they always ask me if I have another trip planned or something. But they've become good friends of mine, and some of those reporters were very fun to work with, definitely. But they don't hang out with them too much anymore.
So I was traveling through like a portion of the U.S. was in like Texas or something during a little bit of Occupy, right?
Cool.
So I could imagine that I was on a different situation. I was like staying at friends' houses, and but I can imagine like that when that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel like it because you could so easily integrate because you were walking and
Right.
hanging out, right? It was just like, do you feel like it kind of usurped your like a bit of your mission? Because like you walk into these places and I can imagine it being kind of carnival-like. Like
Oh yeah, I know what you're saying. It
And then after it's passed,
right.
like but also how does that? Did you have a lot more on it at first, but then it kind of blown over, kind of died?
Yeah. I think how I came at it, I tried not to intermingle a lot of the politics with it. I was kind of coming at it as like more of this, I don't know, I would go to these groups, it would be a core group of people that probably, some of them I knew had masters in political science. They were definitely the organizers. They had a very direct political thing and they were working with people like that. And then there were other groups of people, you know, that were just there to play music and have fun. But I kind of looked at it as a whole, as opposed to like each of the groups, because I mean, at its core, I found in all these different cities that, you know, were happening in other countries too that I didn't go to, there was a group of people that were living together. They were eating, playing music with it, you know, talking about things that weren't Facebook and like stuff like that. And I thought that was great, but I don't know. I actually, like, when I was at the Occupy movements, I didn't always like kind of broadcast what I was up to. I was more just trying to be with them and just hang out. But it was an interesting thing, and I definitely did see the spike in like when I was in New York, it was on national news. By the time I got to like New London, came over into Illinois, or it's a different place. Like the topography changes, the wildlife changes, and you know some part of the people do, but. Yeah, those places surprised me. In my mind, I had something totally else made up, or even a lack of information. And when I got there, they turned out to be beautiful. I found that Indiana is like a caving destination in the world. Like there is huge amount of underground caves there. That is awesome to me, and I had no idea. So yeah, there was.
Through all of that to like a certain place or kinship, like that you did before, or anything like that?
I don't think there's anywhere that's gonna like take me other than to visit. Like I don't know, I get to travel a lot. Being a photographer, I kind of have to be in different places, so I get some. I don't know. It kind of ruined me in the fact that I always feel the need to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And like I don't know. Like Portland has felt the most like home as anywhere. As of late, but I don't know. I don't think there's any specific place where it was like, all right, 10 years, I'm there, I'm buying that house. Places that surprise me, but no, I think I'll just visit them again. Yes.
So, given this whole trip and all the hardships and the benefits,
Mhm.
you ran into someone who said, hey, I had a huge life event and I'm thinking about doing something like this.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to them?
I too with an exhibition that I was doing, and to this day I'll have people like email me out of nowhere saying that same thing, and I'm totally in support of it. I try to connect him with a few people I know, you know, like Osprey or something like that. I'm like, hey, this person wants to do this. I try to give them information. I'll give them the right. I have like a bookmark folder of like things that are helpful Googles or whatever, and I'm just like, yeah, check it out. You know, I find it very exciting when other people are doing kind of extreme travel or travel in other, you know, alternative ways. So, no, I'm all for it, definitely. Any other questions? We can show you some part of my backpack.
Just was wondering, is that the camera that you took? Is it
That, yeah, that is one of them. That is a 35 millimeter rangefinder. It is a Leica M6. I had that, a digital SLR, a 5D Mark II, that I still use. It's kind of failing now, but and yeah, I would just carry everything. I also had a large format, a Speed Graphic View 2, which is a large format 4x5 camera from 1943. That was in the truck. Some days I carried it once, and it was really bad. So yeah, I must have kept it in the truck, but I'd bust it out a few times. Sadly though, a lot of those negatives were eaten by maggots. That's kind of the worst thing to ever happen to photographers, like your negatives or your digital files go missing. Maggots. Long story short, the storage pod, Anthony got some signals mixed, and there was negatives that were in their holders in a bag. Too, talk a little bit more about him. While I was walking, I mean, other than contacting media and stuff like that, he had a lot of downtime, you know, all day. And he actually like came pretty productive with it. He would play guitar. I brought my mom's guitar with us, and he went from being very bad to he was recently signed with a record label, playing guitar in Los Angeles. He was signed to Burger Records. Still playing. So he took the same time that I did to really work with my camera and the medium of my choice to do with music, and seemed to benefit him. So it's pretty cool. All right, last question, and then I'll show you some gear.
Did you consider other ways of getting across the country besides walking?
I did. I mean, I had thought like, oh, a bike would be cool. I heard a lot of people ride their bike. I don't know. I just kind of got in this weird headspace of like being super obsessed with walking, just because I didn't want to have to rely on something else breaking or something like that. And just because like when I shoot, whatever it is, like it breaks down to me just walking around in a certain space. And I thought it'd be really cool to just like blow that up and really know every mile of the U.S. So kind of turned into that. All right. And again, like I said, I'll make this available if I can. I know I have a public link, so you guys can play with it. You can get it on your iPad, your phone, computer. Technology is pretty excellent. So this is my backpack. But yeah, I had this like graffiti artist do this at some point. Somebody stopped me and did this like cool thing. Somewhere on here is Matt Costa, like Jack Johnson's guitar friend. There's signatures on there somewhere. But let me grab my shoes. I know a lot of people ask me like, how many pairs of shoes did you go through? I actually only went through 2 pairs of shoes. I rotated between these 2. I wouldn't call them like good to go, but I still wear them sometimes. Like they're not too bad. These are the shoes. These probably saw about like 8 to 10 states, maybe a little over half of the trip, but they are, yep, just regular Brooks Adrenaline trail shoes. This is kind of a cool piece here. Anthony's little sister, who was 7 at the time, made us this like tapestry for our truck that we hung up in the camper shell. Pretty awesome. Yeah. Puns at 7. I love it. But yeah, sorry, I was kind of holding it behind there. Kind of funny. I'll just drape this right here. I'll pull out of here is just basic camping equipment. Had a stove, a little kind of gas-powered stove, and I try to keep as minimal as possible. It's kind of my approach to hiking. Saved a lot of weight. I would have sunscreen, water in my stove most days, and especially in the desert, water would be 20, 30 pounds alone by itself. There's just such a need for it. There were multiple times too where I came pretty close to like collapsing due to lack of water. It was pretty bad. But, yeah.
Processes are and why almost nobody uses them. Jacqueline will be speaking about an assortment of alternative processes with a more in-depth look at gum bichromate, a colorful but fickle process that she uses on a regular basis. Having been mostly self-taught, she's made countless mistakes over the years, and she will share why she embraces failure. Should be really good. Thanks again. That was great.
Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem, man.